welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Hey, Earthkeepers. Have you ever wondered what it might be like to align your daily work in ways that directly benefit the planet? Or do you know folks in the early stages of vocational exploration who are seeking meaningful work in fields connected to earth care? Well, in this episode, I'll be talking with Brennan Ziegler, a guy in his mid-20s who has dedicated himself to exploring many possible paths in earthkeeping as a vocation. As you listen, consider people you know who might be inspired by Brennan's journey, and send them a link to this episode if you think they might benefit. Brennan, it is so good to have you on the podcast. Maybe you can give our listeners just a little orientation and tell us a bit about yourself, about your place, and about what you're doing these days.
Sweet. Thanks, Forrest. It's a pleasure to be here. For your listeners, I know Forrest through my parents who went to grad school up in Vancouver, BC at Regent College with Forrest. I wasn't born there, but I was born after their time there. I now reside in California, but as we'll probably explore in this conversation, have spent some time in other places. I live about 25 minutes from downtown San Diego in a town called Cardiff with a bunch of roommates, some from college, some from high school, actually. I love to surf, play soccer, watch soccer, spend time with my brother, with my fiance, and just love being outside in general.
Excellent. Well, as you pointed out, your parents have been close friends of mine since we did graduate studies at Regent College. And I met them before they had kids. So I've had the privilege of watching you and your siblings grow up over the years, at least from a distance. And now you're an adult in your mid-20s. And honestly, I can't help but feel really proud of the creative and courageous choices you're making as you chart your own vocational future as an advocate for the environment. So thanks for being on the podcast. Let me ask you this. One of the things that concerns me most these days is how younger folks like you and like my daughter are grappling with really challenging issues that the world faces these days. And frankly, a lot of people your age find it hard to know how they can make any difference at all. And that's especially true when it comes to climate change. So I'm intrigued by your story because you seem to be really proactive about finding a vocational path by which you can both make a living and be an agent of change in the world. That said, what's your take on how your generation is thinking and feeling about their future and the future of the planet?
I think there's a broad spectrum of emotions that people my age tend to feel, whether it's they're frozen with anxiety over the future that we're going to see in our lifetime, or they just seal themselves off to it and have to become apathetic because potential reality seems to like too much, or there's those, I would say I fall into this last group that are hopeful by the solutions and by the momentum that we do have and are driven to be the generation that rights the ship. I just bend towards an optimistic view of the world. I think everything's going to work out all the time. The more I learn about other people's actions, the more encouraged I am that we have momentum and we can fix things before they're irreversible. You're a professor, you have a daughter my age. How do you, from your viewpoint, see my generation thinking about those things and acting on those things?
I would say in some ways it's part of what motivates me even to do this podcast and to work for Circlewood, because I'm really keen to find reasons for hope. I'm really keen to help people find their way forward into a sense that what they do actually does matter to the future of the planet. It's hard though, because I don't want people to hope unrealistically. I have a friend, again, I knew him growing up since he was a kid, Wesley, who really struggles with the idea of having children given the future that those children will face. And that's something that not many people understand. His parents, I think, don't understand, right? That's hard for them to understand how seriously he takes it. But I do think the stakes are that high. We have to understand that change is happening so quickly that we're going to be facing, and we already are facing, some of these very hard transitions to a different climate reality. I think some people find hope not so much as dependent on the outcomes of what you do, but hope is simply acting because you know what's right. You simply do what's right in the face of the challenge and trust God to work out the rest, right? I mean, you have to give up a certain amount of control, but if you make your hope dependent on outcomes, that might make you quit pretty early on. So hope really is just doing the right thing. So that's what I try to tell my students is persevere, figure out what is the best thing, the right thing that you're called to do, and do it with courage and do it without a sense of the outcome being what determines if you keep on doing it.
I 100% agree with that. I think there's no perfect solution to climate change, and yet that doesn't mean we shouldn't use those imperfect solutions. I totally agree. The hope of just doing the right thing and extrapolate that over millions of actions is how we get to the future we want.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I would say that really that might be the main purpose of the Earthkeepers podcast, helping people to see what other people are doing in terms of acting, in terms of resisting, in terms of doing the right thing. When you see other people doing that, you do feel like you might be part of something bigger than just yourself, which is a source of hope, I think. My daughter struggles with going between two different extremes of feeling despair and feeling hope. I know one thing that makes a big difference for her, though, is the people around her. I think it's hard really to take a stand on some issues and to feel like you can advocate or have agency for change unless you're around other people who also believe that change is possible. Have you got good friends, good compatriots around you that you feel support you in your mission?
Yeah, definitely. I work at Dr. Bronner's, which is a fair trade organic soap company that really focuses on stewarding the earth from which it makes its raw material-based soaps. And so many of my coworkers are that kind of support for me. But then also, I still live close enough to the community that I went to university at, and I studied international development and sustainability. And so many of my classmates went into fields that are kind of addressing the issues we're talking about. And so whenever we get together, we'll discuss these sort of things and discuss ways we're discouraged, but then also cool things or cool stories of hope that we're hearing. And there's a bunch of other communities that I'm connected to as well that do that for me. I would say like the B Corp network, there's a local chapter in San Diego. That's actually how I found my job. And on Wednesday night, I was at their monthly community network event. So those are professionals that are working hard and hopeful of a better future. 1% for the Planet members, that's an environmental giving organization. And those are people in the same space. And then an organization that I interned for called Plant with Purpose. They're based here in San Diego. And every year now, my involvement with them is just going to their annual gala. But the whole point of the gala is stories of hope. So through all of those things, I feel like I stay optimistic.
Yeah, actually, Plant with Purpose, if you look back over the episodes over the years, we feature them often because we love their story. We love their story because they have found ways to combine really the interests of people, especially people in need, with the needs of the planet as a whole. They look at community as both the community of people, but the community of people in the context of the community of creation. You and I share common interest in that sense because you're interested in both of those things as well. And if I could, maybe I could hear about experiences and influences that have maybe shaped those interests. And maybe we'll start with a passion for creation care. How did your love of nature and eventually your advocacy for the environment come about?
The earliest memory being just fascinated or enamored by nature was where I was born in Sacramento. We lived there backed up to the levee of the American River. So it felt like our backyard was enormous. And for a young kid, it just felt limitless for me. In Sacramento and the Tahoe area, there's these Sierra fence lizards, which have beautiful blue bellies. I just thought they were the coolest thing ever. I just remember staring at them for hours, just thinking they were the most beautiful thing ever. And so that's like an earliest memory for me. And then I think my parents wanting to take us and expose us to natural beauty a lot of times. So living about 2 hours from Tahoe and the Sierras, a lot of early memories of getting to go backpacking and so kind of experience these vast landscapes. I think moving to Scotland was a huge part of this. And if you've ever been to Scotland, you know that, or have seen pictures, it's a totally different kind of beauty. Like it's not the super high mountains that we have in the States, but it's almost like an untamed, rugged wildness. And then we moved from Scotland back to Washington State in 2013 and lived in southern Washington. All Washington State is beautiful, but especially the southern part that we lived in, an hour from Mount St. Helens, an hour from Mount Hood, an hour from the Oregon coast, right in the thick of so much incredible natural beauty. That was where we were spending our weekends, where we were hiking, where most of our free time when we weren't in school was spent exploring that area. And so I think my family really values natural beauty. Just getting out in nature was such a really big value for us.
Each time you describe a place, I'm kind of carried back to that place. In all of those places, I've spent time with either your family or at least with your dad. In Scotland, when you guys lived there, he and I went to see the restoration work in the Caledonian Forest. And we looked at this kind of communal living place in the north of Scotland called Findhorn, which was really fun to see how people were trying to live better with creation. So, yeah, your dad has been a real partner for me in some of my learning as well. So because you and I share this common interest in bringing together the goals of development, which primarily focuses on people, and the goals of earth care, which really talks about care for the community of creation, I'm wondering, how have you made sense of the two together? How does one impact the other? How is one interdependent on the other?
Yeah, I think that word interdependent really rings true. I think Plant with Purpose is such a great example of this in practice, and really was one of my first exposures to development work is environmental work. But Plant with Purpose's method is essentially teaching people agroforestry and agriculture techniques that then in turn improves crop yields, improves biodiversity, improves the soil health, which then builds climate resilience and helps those communities face climate shocks like droughts and floodings. And through all of that, you're creating jobs, you're creating economic resilience for the community, and you're creating an actual community bond of permanence that is fighting the rural to urban migration track that faces many communities all over the world. So yeah, I think that they're one and the same in many senses.
For a lot of people, their interest in nature is translated into advocacy and activism as they begin to form their own vision in university for those who do go to school. And I'm wondering if that's been the case for you. What happened in university that helped you to make your love of nature into something a bit more pragmatic and service-oriented?
Yeah, absolutely. I think mine started at that kind of university age when I was 18, 19, but a little bit before university, I was able to take a gap year between high school and college. And on this gap year, got to live in three really beautiful places and be around more wildlife than I'd ever been in my life. And so I spent 4 months at a Torchbearers Bible Institute in San Jose, Costa Rica. And Costa Rica, I think it has the highest degree of biodiversity in the world. I could be wrong, but incredible range of species like jaguars, tarantulas, tarantula hawk wasps, bullard ants, crocodiles, sharks, like everything you can think of. And that really exposed me to kind of like exotic wildlife. But more impactful on this gap year was time spent working on a regenerative agriculture project in Senegal. So through a connection from the church that my dad was actually pastoring in Washington at the time of my gap year, I asked if I could volunteer for this regenerative agriculture project called the Beersheba Project. And essentially it's an 100-hectare fenced-in plot of land out in the Sahel in the bush of Senegal that's basically training West African farmers on regenerative farming techniques with like a scripture and spiritual curriculum background. It's very cool because the Sahel is basically the transitional biome between the savanna grasslands and the Sahara. And so it can go either way. Like it can be desertification moving south, or it can be expansion of the savanna. And it really falls to the people that are living there or are working there to decide what they want it to be. The Beersheba Project serves as a beacon of how you can prevent overgrazing, reduce synthetic fertilizer inputs, and make a quality of life off the land that hasn't been seen for decades if you just stop following conventional industrial agriculture techniques. And so while I was there, I was exposed to this whole internship training program essentially as a fly on the wall and volunteering and supporting wherever I could. But I was seeing how these communities that were at the frontier of how climate change was going to change their lives were taking a stand and learning techniques that were going to hopefully give them a brighter future. And so I think that reality combined with the conversations I was having with the people that actually put on the program really informed what I chose to study at university. Quick little highlight between that time in Senegal and when I started university was that I went and worked for Rocha in the south of France at their Domaine de Cormet Institute. Rocha is an international Christian creation care organization. I think you had Peter and Miranda Harris at Regent College. Oh, anyways, started by professors of yours and my parents. And it was there that I saw more actual conservation of species. That institute exists to track and protect the wild wolf population, butterflies, and a couple other species. And so I was doing like transect and like visual observation stuff with one of the resident biologists, and then just kind of general like landscaping work for them, getting plugged in wherever I could. I switched my major from just general business to international development at that point and chose to attend Point Loma Nazarene University that fall. And a lot of my decisions about what I'd wanted to do career-wise had been made going into Point Loma, and then they were just further nurtured by the professors that I was having and the courses that I was taking and the classmates that I was around.
I would say that for people who are listening, especially people who may be around your age, it's incredible what you managed to do in just one gap year. And it's incredible how formative that was in terms of your educational future and beyond. So I hope people will take your example to heart and actually consider really one of the ways of entering into this field of earth care and development being experienced, visiting places where the work is being done. Well, right now, you're doing a couple of things that really intrigue me. First, as you noted, you work for Dr. Bronner's soap company, and you have also been a ClimateBase fellow. I'm wondering, first of all, if you could talk about your work at Dr. Bronner's, which predated the fellowship. Honestly, it's got to be one of the coolest companies in the world to work for. Tell us about them and what you like best about the work that you do for them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm a little biased. It's hard to think of too many other companies that would be as fun to work for. But I found Dr. Bronner's about 2 months after I graduated from university. They're the highest ranked B Corp in the world, and I'd heard about them from selling at a grocery store as a cashier, but I didn't know they were even in San Diego County. And I was looking for companies that I could work for that would allow me to stay down here. And so I researched them. I found out about their vertically integrated supply chain with an internal team that basically accompanies and provides business support to their supply chain partners. And from my studies, I knew how rare that sort of thing was. And basically from news articles, podcasts, whatever, found that they're really an industry leader in terms of ethical sourcing and sustainable progressive business practices. And so I was like, that's good enough for me. I'll apply for everything on their website and we'll see how it goes. And I joined the company as a entry HR admin position and working for a really cool team that's allowed me to evolve and grow my role, getting plugged in with our internal sustainability team, getting to work on projects that are kind of unrelated to my job. But really at Dr. Bronner's, any job can be a sustainability job because it's so ingrained into the culture here of looking at business in a non-extractive manner, but in a manner where we can do good for people and the planet.
You've used that term B Corp a couple of times. Maybe for our listeners who are not familiar with it, you could tell people what that means. What's B Corp?
So B Corp is a third-party certification body. It basically provides a rating system for companies to communicate to consumers how good of a business for people and planet they are. So they have macro categories like your community, environment, social, that sort of thing. It's pretty rigorous to get certified, and Dr. Bronner's was the highest ranked B Corp in the world. We recently chose to not recertify our membership with them because they don't have a tiered membership system. And we see that as a non-negotiable for a certification like this because multinational corporations that have documented cases of unethical practices in their supply chains have been able to get certified. And so we don't want to be in the same breath as those sort of organizations. And so we wrote open letters in the Los Angeles Times when Nespresso was certified because there's a ton of news articles about Nestle's use of child labor in their cocoa supply chain and stuff like that. And so B Corp is great. There's no reason to throw it out entirely. We just have slightly moved away from it. But it's still a great resource for consumers, and it was how I found my job here. And I still participate in that community because it's a really cool, vibrant community of people seeking to make change.
Well, talking about B Corp brings up a really important question, and that is that a lot of companies maybe take advantage of being able to label themselves somehow green or earth-friendly in a way that might be disingenuous, right? It only tells part of the story and maybe can occlude or hide more harmful practices in their production and their marketing, etc. In the social entrepreneurship courses that I teach, we call that greenwashing, right? Just sort of putting out front things that will make you look good, even though that goodness doesn't permeate the whole supply chain, production process, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering, in your experience, how much of the Dr. Bronner story is authentically good for the world, and why isn't it just marketing hype?
Our founder, Emanuel Bronner, immigrated to the United States pre-Holocaust, but then lost a lot of his family in Germany in the Holocaust. And he wasn't selling soap, he was selling a message. In his worldview was an idea of stewarding relationships with one another, respecting our common humanity, and also stewarding and returning to the earth from which you get your profits. And so that was baked into our DNA in 1948 when we incorporated. And we have 6 cosmic principles that we do business through. They're the very lens through which most decisions are made. And so we prevent greenwashing by having it built into us. So we're also called the Fighting Soap Company. We sued Procter & Gamble for $1 a couple years ago because they were saying that they had organic ingredients in their products when they actually didn't. We also address greenwashing by just having a superior product. We source the highest quality raw materials from suppliers that we work with on a one-to-one basis. So we have a supply chain relations team that means that basically our suppliers are a phone call away, people that we have consistent, transparent, accountable relationships with. And so then we're able to share timely and real stories with our consumers about where the goods are coming from. So I would say sourcing practices and a superior product are the 2 main ways. And then we're a private company, so we don't have to tell a ton of the reporting data that most publicly owned companies would, but we choose to. So things like our waste data from being a manufacturing corporation, our greenhouse gas emissions, all sorts of things like that we report, and our teams spend a lot of months of the year working to make that data as accurate as possible. And then finally, I would say certifications are the silver bullet against greenwashing, because that's a third party coming in and saying, no, they're actually doing what they're saying. And we have at least 17 certifications that we're verified with, some of the major ones being like EWG certified, which basically means how good or toxic is something for your skin. The one I really want to highlight is the regenerative organic certification, which is a certification that we actually founded with Patagonia and the Rodale Institute. And this is blockbuster greenwashing takedown where you're basically adhering to 5 pretty hard to achieve pillars around animal welfare, around soil health, around farming training and investment, and several others for fair labor practices in your supply chain. Maybe it sounds too good to be true, but I feel really blessed to work here because it really is a company that's walking the walk.
Yeah, and I honestly think as a company, it's a good example for any business, even the smallest businesses who want to do more than make profit, who actually want to be a force for good in the world, to emulate. I think that there's so much that can be learned, in part because, as you pointed out, Dr. Bronner as a company is pretty transparent. And they put their story up for the world to see. And they can do that, I think, because they're doing most things right. So I would encourage people to go at least to the Dr. Bronner site and hear some of the stories. It's pretty amazing. Well, let me pivot just a little bit to this other adventure in your life, and that is your involvement in the ClimateBase Fellowship. And I want to note for our listeners that ClimateBase is an organization that helps people to find jobs that are connected with climate solutions, and in fact has listings even of available jobs on their site. So we'll definitely provide a link to the website in the show notes. But in terms of the ClimateBase Fellowship, what kinds of opportunities has that given you? And what have you learned about yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely been a really cool experience for me. I think prior to entering into the fellowship, I discovered there's three main reasons people participate. One is what most people actually know ClimateBase for, what you mentioned, that it's a climate job site. And so job seekers do the fellowship, but it's also a place where people find climate talent. So a lot of climate startup founders will do the fellowship as well. And then the final group is what I fall into, which is just generally curious, interested people that want to increase their climate literacy. And so it's a 3-month, 12-week program where you're covering at a high level 12 major sectors of what jobs in the climate space can look like. And so everything from food and ag to transportation to engineered carbon removal techniques to the built infrastructure economy, tons of really big topics. And I would say the biggest thing I've learned from it is how to make talking about climate change relatable and moving to someone who wouldn't otherwise care. And so we'll talk a lot about the transition from using fossil fuels. And someone that wouldn't care about climate change, they complain about their electricity bill. And so then you can talk to them about, okay, this is because our composition of how we generate electricity in San Diego County is this percent of fossil fuels. And if we were able to reduce it to renewables, then in the long run, you would see your bill reduced. I would say for me, it's been a really cool experience where I've seen myself grow in my ability to listen to more conversations in an informed manner, because I'm gaining a little bit of high-level vocab, which is then allowing me to enter into those conversations and feel confident to ask more questions, which then leads to more understanding. And then going back to what we talked about at the start of this conversation about building hope and optimism, the climate literacy exposure has really shown me a lot of other companies and individuals that are working really hard to address climate change. And that's just been super encouraging.
Well, what does the future look like for you? What do you hope it looks like?
Part of the fellowship, especially the transportation week of curriculum that we had, focused on like things like ways that countries and cities are seeking to take back their infrastructure from cars, essentially. So I hope that my future looks like living in a place where cars aren't the priority. I like cycling a lot, and I would do it a lot more if I felt safer and if there was better infrastructure for it. I also hope for a future where clean air is just a given, because we've transitioned most of our forms of transportation away from combustion engines. And then professionally, I was pretty content to go for whatever job I could find my way into at Dr. Bronner's based off what I had learned about them through their ethical sourcing and sustainable business practices. And so I think just getting to go deeper into that, getting to impact and be part of the relationships with the people that we get our raw materials from, because similar to those that I was around in Senegal, those really are the people that are going to be affected by climate change before we are. And so supporting the work that they're doing and having relationships with them so that I know the challenges they're facing and can better advocate here in the West in our decisions that we're making.
Practically speaking, what would you say to listeners to this podcast who might be yearning for ways to become agents of change and healing in the world, especially when it comes to doing good for the planet?
Yeah, I would say educate yourself, because that really is the way we can overcome the numbness or the frozen inaction around the reality of climate change. Reading a book I read earlier this year by Anna Elizabeth Johnson, who's on Patagonia's board, called What If We Get It Right? Essentially, every chapter is her interviewing a different, really impressive leader that's either leading a company or leading a movement around climate action. And that's a really encouraging book. I would say doing something like ClimateBase, where you're just informing yourself on what actually working in the climate sector would look like. Yeah, I would say education is the main way that you can start that process.
What's your advice to younger generations who might not have a lot of hope in terms of pursuing vocations that make a real difference?
I don't want to just be morbid and grim. The sad answer is you don't really have another choice. Mars is not the solution. This is the only Earth we have, and it's a miracle that we're here, that we exist, and that our planet can support the life that it does support. And so I would just say this is a wartime effort.
We've been in conversation with Brennan Ziegler, who works for Dr. Bronner's and is a ClimateBase fellow. For more information about Brennan and the organizations mentioned in our conversation, go to this episode's show notes. Earthkeepers podcast is a production of Circlewood, an organization that encourages people to pursue a more ecologically conscious faith. Our executive producer is James Amidon, and our sound engineer is Dave Olfers. Jessalyn Gentry is our communications manager, and Forrest Reed is the composer of our original music. I'm Forrest Inslee, your podcast host, and we're grateful for the time you've spent listening to this episode. If you know someone who would appreciate hearing this podcast conversation, it would be great if you could send them a link. In any case, I hope you'll join us again for our next episode of the Earthkeepers podcast.